First of all, thanks for joining us, everybody. Today we're going to have a seminar with Mr. Ralph Lam, who's recently returned to Hong Kong. Hey, Ralph, how's it going?
Good, good. How are you?
Yeah, good. So what we're going to hope to get from, what we hope to share with everybody is kind of just your perspective on, you know, the actual process of applying to a boarding school, what that's like, some of the key steps that you've gone through yourself, some tips that you think might be good for people to, write down or understand, and then actually kind of get your perspective on what it's like to attend once you've gotten in. So, the first step being actually applying and going through that process, but then after that, now that you're there, how do you actually do really well and succeed in all of that? I guess, yeah, if you wouldn't mind, just give us a quick little introduction of you and kind of what's going on with you.
All right, so a little bit about me. Let's see, start with my name. I'm Ralph Lam, currently a lower or a sophomore at Phillips Andover, and I'm from Hong Kong, obviously. Yeah, so I've been through the process of application. I've been through freshman year. It's a life-changing experience. It's a lot of people think it's a bit of an exaggeration, but that's the best way that I can put it.
Yeah. I think a lot of the processes, we've been talking about this, just catching up over the last couple of days or so. I think a lot of the processes that you would think, and what's so valuable about your opinion is that a lot of these things that you would think are very, straightforward or almost sort of like well known or common sense can be really mysterious to a lot of people. So I definitely want to make sure that we have some time to go through some of the things that I think are some common questions, common concerns, and then actually get maybe more of a nuanced or a personal experience that you've kind of gone through. So I guess let's just jump right in. You all set?
Yeah, yeah.
Cool, cool. Okay. So let's go ahead and begin with, I think one of the main questions that we typically get is when going through that boarding school application process, when did you actually begin? I mean, you entered for, what grade did you enter for? And in order to enter for that grade, what was the process like, sort of the timeline for that?
Um, so I actually came in pretty late into the game. A lot of the kids at my school were talking about, oh, I want to go to Exeter, I want to go to Choate, and I was like, I do not know what you're talking about. So I started very late. I would recommend for the standard applicant to start between October and February, right? That those are the prime times when
Sure.
schools are looking for potential students.
Hmm.
Um, and working starting as early as possible gives you time to plan out what you need to do prior to applying to boarding schools, right? What community service activities you want to participate in, what summer camps you want to
Yeah.
go to. It gives you more time to prep for the SAT, which is a very concerning part for a lot of people.
So,
Um,
so you kind of jumped into it a little bit late, getting in
yeah,
around October. So you didn't necessarily plan all those summer activities before for, the three
no,
years in
no.
advance or anything like that?
Oh no, I didn't I wasn't born ready to go to a boarding school. I wasn't born and my parents said, yeah, he's going to Andover.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So yeah, it was just, I was very, very like overwhelmed with the amount of stuff that I needed to do to actually apply. So
Yeah.
I would recommend going pretty early as this school lets you.
Okay. So would you say, is it fair to say that in getting a little bit of a late start, you weren't necessarily sure that you wanted to go at first? Is that about right?
Yeah, I think,
Okay.
but also at the same time, it didn't. It was sort of a way to reinforce that I wanted to go.
Okay. To make sure it was the right call.
Because it was the last minute. There's a lot of heart that went into. Oh, I definitely want to go to this school because I put in
Yeah.
that time. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So what you're saying, I think what we can, sort of learn from all that is that even if you haven't spent your entire adolescence or your entire school career preparing to attend a top boarding school, it's still very possible to kind of, get everything together and go through all the processes and then obviously be successful in attending a top boarding school, even if you do start later. I think from my side, what we
Mhm.
typically see, or when we see a lot of people begin is, I'd say maybe at least a year ahead of time is the common thing, and it kind of goes back to what you were saying about the SSAT. That can be a really tricky part for a lot of people. So whether it was the SSAT or anything else, I think maybe from your perspective, what was, especially with the time constraints, what was maybe the most challenging part about going through the application process to you?
Um, well, first of all, when you click onto the application website, there are myriad categories for you to check, right? And you need to fill all those out.
Yeah.
And you know, um, that was very overwhelming. It was pretty challenging to get through that process of getting everything together and then submitting the application. But I would say writing the essays, not only because the essays are essays and you have to actually write them. Oh my God, but
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
actually making sure that you are able to say as much as you can in the amount of space that they give you, right? Because you're trying to
Yeah.
tell a story of the past 13 to 14 years of your life in about a couple paragraphs, right? And the admissions counselors want to get to know you as well as possible
Yeah.
through the medium of essays. But you can't like write a lot. You can't, over exaggerate. You can't stretch the truth too far because they will see right through that. So I think
Hmm.
finding the balance between telling the story about yourself but also being pretty concise, that was pretty challenging for me.
Okay. So,
And yeah,
so like, I guess this is a very specific point about the writing style. Would you say that in telling the story and being concise, are you sacrificing a lot of description? Are you just kind of getting straight to the point? Or how would you kind of describe, obviously every school has different questions and that kind of shapes the way you respond, but would you say it's kind of a little bit more effective to get straight to the point in your essays, or do you feel that there does need to be a sense of descriptive value, description, imagination, and these sorts of things in your written responses?
so I had the freshman year, I had this English teacher. His name was Mr. Domina, and he essentially broke down two different styles of writing, right? One was the Ernest Hemingway style, straight to the point, concise. You kind of just get there. It was
Terse,
very
yeah.
clear. And then the second was the J.K. Rowling, Mary Shelley, right? Your descriptive, bohemian, flowery language. And I think that a lot of people really do enjoy the more concise way of writing because I think that especially as admissions counselors, they can kind of make that inference on their own. You don't need to be overly descriptive, right? You're telling a story about yourself, but not necessarily a fictional character because you're as real as you can get. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you got to keep it real, I guess, is probably one of the top tips you can say. But I think a lot of people worry about. I think when you're going through and you're doing essays, some students might not necessarily have a lot to say. They might not have a lot of community service events. They might not have an amazing Harry Potter style narrative that illustrates their character or anything like that. So I think on my end, something that I see a lot of is when you talk about that flowery language, I would say that sometimes you can have that flowery language where there is actual substance behind it, maybe, but then other times you can kind of tell that it's just filling in and trying to make a word count, and because people just don't have anything to say.
Mhm.
So how do you get to the point where you do have something to say? What are some of like the community service things that you kind of have done in your life? I know you said you didn't really necessarily, prepare years in advance, but how did it work out that you had things to talk about, and how would you kind of describe your community service or community engagement and those sort of things that are fairly common in application questions?
It helps
Tough
to talk
question.
about need to process it for a second. It does help to talk about your extracurriculars, your activities, your achievements, right? But
Hmm.
it gets to a point where you start showing off, right? And you don't want to come off as this arrogant prick in your applications, right?
Okay.
Um, so what I would recommend doing is also talking a lot about yourself, right? What you learned from that experience, because a lot of what the admissions counselors want to see is
Hmm.
growth not only while you were potentially being in Andover, but also growth before you come to Andover, right? What those activities taught you, what those community service activities taught you. While you might not be able to talk a lot about the activities themselves, you'd probably be able to talk about what you gained from that. Let's say, for example, you were really passionate about cleaning up the ocean, right? The ecosystem. You want to maintain you want sustainability. And you went and worked with a nonprofit that helped clean up the ocean or do a bunch of beach cleanups, right? And you would talk about, not only just say, oh, I went to this beach cleanup, right? There isn't really anything about that. You can describe like the sand and the texture and get into that. But I would recommend also talking about, oh, I learned through this activity this about myself, X or Y, right?
Yeah, okay. I see what you mean. So it's not just straight listing, I've done X, Y, or Z, but X led to Y and then led to Z in a more sort of a causal relationship. And how that changed you as a person, how you started to grow or become a better human being. Okay, all right. And when you're kind of going through the process of all of these different questions, in relation to the timeline, I mean, is this something that you went through and did several drafts of, or did you just kind of listen to your heart, sit down, pound out the keyboard and send it in right off? Or was this something more that you did put, from October to, November, December, ahead of the January deadlines, and you actually sat down with and revised over and over and over again?
So this is definitely speaking from personal experience. I can't really say this for anyone else, but a lot of my peers and classmates at Andover will definitely say that I am somewhat of a perfectionist when it comes to writing essays. I'm willing to delete an entire paper and start from scratch if it meant that I would actually get what I need to say across. And so definitely when I was writing this essay, it was multiple drafts, multiple revisions, right? On it to actually finish the essay itself, because there were so many specific things that needed to interlock together to actually, convey what I wanted to say and my growth, my experiences. I couldn't just scrap it all together and then, throw it back.
No, that's fair. I think a lot of people worry about when the best time. So if you're working on all of those essays and all those applications, is it essential to get them done sooner rather than later? You hear things like rolling admissions deadlines. Did you actually, get those in as soon as possible, or did you wait until, December and actually submit them at a much later kind of date in the timeline?
Again, I'm not the kind of person who waits until the end to actually submit something. It could help, right? You have more time to fix it. But I realized that once the thing is done, and the more time I spend on it, I might overcorrect myself, right? I would just end up coming.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So I would say that once you read it a couple times and you feel as though you're able to get across what you want to say, don't keep going, right? Just get to the final draft and send it in. Make sure you have everything in order, of course, but do not overcorrect, or else you'd probably inserting what you don't need to.
Okay. Yeah. No, got that. That's a good thing to remember. And then I think also one thing to remember with your essays is that a lot of people worry about going into those interviews. So I was kind of hoping to talk to you about the interview process and kind of what you felt and what it was like for you going through that. A lot of people, I think they kind of get these essay responses, or they fill in these applications, and then they can end up just sort of regurgitating or saying the same sort of thing that they wrote in the interview process. I mean, is this something that the admissions and the interviewers will actually look out for? And how much did you actually sort of use your essays as a guide to your interview?
No, just don't use your essays as like this script. It's good to prepare something for the interview, right? Just like get your basic facts in order. If they ask you about what clubs you want to participate in, definitely go ahead, right?
Don't contradict yourself.
Yeah, do not contradict yourself. They will read that. It isn't necessary to type an entire script for your interview. That's basically what I'm saying. The interviewers have been doing this for years on end. They will see right through you if you just use rote memorization to just go in. throw it all out there, and yeah, they'll see right through that, and you probably come off as pretty robotic, and
Okay. Yeah.
yeah, because they want the interview. Not only is it used to it's used to see how you interact with everyone else, right? How you interact with people, how you hold a conversation, if you can hold a conversation for that matter. Yeah, while they use that to get a better understanding of you within the limited amount of time, make sure that you hold the conversation and you make it feel like it's natural. Don't think, oh, right, this is like the last shot that I have or the one shot that I have to make a good impression, because that would probably throw you off by miles.
Okay, so better to just be relaxed and not necessarily memorize anything, as long as you don't contradict yourself. Yeah. Well, what would you say? I think another going back to that what you said about being robotic or not being robotic. What would you say that the tenor or the mood that you went for in those kind of exchanges with interviews? Is there any way that you might be able to advise people your age or people who are applying or going through these interviews on the sort of the mood or the atmosphere that they want to create in those interviews?
You have to come off as friendly, open, intelligent, and mature. It's a lot to encapsulate, but basically, don't overdo it. Right? Don't be too energetic. Don't be too mature.
Yeah.
Don't give them a death stare. Yeah, right. Yeah, as if you're talking to someone that you've known for a while, right? Just having
that's an interesting way to put it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. You don't want to be really immature. Throw curse words around every now and then, because that's just inappropriate in a conversation like that.
Yeah.
But I would say that you want an uplifting mood. You don't want it to be a very grave, intense conversation, because that not only is that not enjoyable for you, depending on who you are, but also the interviewer, right? You don't want them to feel miserable, because they're also part of that dynamic.
Mm-hmm. I mean, what happens when you do get, so you might be having things might be running along really smoothly, you're having a great time, interview's going great. What happens? What are some of the strategies when you get a question that you're completely unprepared for? Because I think some people, they might actually, without doing rote memorization, did you find anything that might have caught you off guard that you weren't expecting? A question that you never thought would come up? Was there anything that you can remember out of that process that might have surprised you?
One good tactic that I learned is you look them in the eye and you say, that's a good question. Now you wait for another 5 to 10 seconds. Usually they allow you to do that because they assume that you're not prepared for this, right? You can prepare a little bit, just don't prepare too much, but you take your time. I think they'd much rather, of course, you don't take an entire half hour to then come up with a response, but
sure, yeah.
They much rather a much more cogent, fluid, and organized response than just a bunch of, you're just spewing stuff out, right? You're not just shotgunning words at them and hope.
Yeah. So just to sum that up, you're saying it's better. So what people should do is look them in the eye, say, hey, that's a great question. And then take a couple seconds, let your mind run through the question. And it's far more valuable to deliver a slower, clearer response that actually answers the question well, rather than just sort of saying something immediately to keep it going.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Nice. Okay. And then I think, just to, pick your brain a little bit more about the interview process, and we'll try to move on. But I think one of the other common questions that a lot of people do worry about, and I'd love to hear your perspective on, is how do you end the interview? Okay. So, you always hear the typical cliche is, do you have any questions, right? So should people have a few questions prepared, or should they just more naturally respond to the flow of the conversation and try to ask a follow-up question based on that conversation? So what would or something completely different. So what would be your kind of advice for how people can kind of exit, put a ribbon, put a bow on that interview, tie it all up nicely, and leave the room feeling like, oh, that ended well, that ended on a good note?
So definitely you want to have a couple questions prepared. Don't give them an entire list, right? You're not interviewing them, but you want to show that you actually care about the school that you're going to, right? You want to show that you're engaged and you really want to attend this school. You're selling yourself, basically, right? And a good way to do that is ask a couple questions about like detailed stuff that you can't find on the website. Because if you
Hmm.
ask them a question that you can figure out in the frequently asked questions section, they'll
Yeah.
probably point you there and think that you weren't paying attention.
Yeah, please leave. Okay.
But after all the questions are asked, I would recommend getting their email and getting their card
Hmm.
to show that to then send them a thank you email
Hmm.
after the interview and show that you care, right? Show that that conversation meant something to you, and
Hmm.
that's a good way to wrap things up because then it makes the interview think that you're actually engaged in what they were telling you.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that, yeah, you actually touched on a really good point there. Kind of having a consistent line of communication with the admissions board, but not necessarily overdoing it. You know, we will kind of hear about parents or moms going through and kind of emailing or calling or messaging admissions personnel, ad nauseum. It can be a little bit much, but so your advice would be just get that card, get that email, and just send a simple thank you for having done the interview and leave it at that. Nice.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that kind of leads nicely to something else that I was hoping to speak with you about is the role of mom, the role of dad. Is dad simply just like the driver? He rents the car and drives around, New England for a week straight. What are parents doing throughout this process, and how can they feel? One, how can they feel like they're a part of it and they're helping their son, their daughter in a good way? Because that's what they want. They want to help. So what can they do to
Um,
help? And then how can they be sure to maybe not like overstep or maybe decrease the chances of admission?
so not only do they have to fill out the parent application and actually like supplement the activities of the child, but do do not, and I repeat, do not talk more than your child in the interview. Right? The interview is centered around finding out about more about your child and their experiences, not your child's experiences through your own eyes. Right? The
Yeah.
admissions counselors would much rather hear from the applicant themselves and their parents. Don't be a helicopter parent. You can ask one or two questions, and I would say that's enough. Don't be
Mhm.
talking throughout the entire tour either, because that shows that it's more as if the parents are sort of pushing their child to go to this school rather
Interesting.
than the child actually wanting to go.
Okay.
And also,
Yeah.
if you want to be a bit more specific, at Andover, you're looking for kids who have initiative, right? Who are willing to speak up for themselves and not wait for others to speak for them.
Sure. Okay. So you're saying not only during the actual interview process, but even on the campus tour, try to have mom and
Hmm.
dad maybe keep the questions, keep the comments, keep the explanations to a minimum, and really allow
Yeah.
the person who's applying to, step forward and speak for themselves, maybe a crucial part of the entire process. Yeah.
Yeah, because the parents aren't applying, the kids. So.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. Because sometimes you'll see students, and I'll sit down with students all the time trying to, prepare for interview processes. And I've actually I'll never forget this guy. He's a really sweet young guy. He was applying for much earlier for junior boarding. But I asked him, like, okay, so why do you want to go to, this school? And his answer was literally, my mom wants me to go. And I just couldn't believe it. I was like, buddy, no, 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 no. So I think even for the younger applicants, but especially for rising high schoolers, you need to actually want to go to the school, have reasons, and then be able to justify and explain yourself throughout the interview process, without maybe mom or dad kind of overshadowing. So I think that's kind of a few things that we've talked about now. So the essential timeline, I think you mentioned you really want to make sure you're getting into that for October. Submit things earlier if possible. Don't wait until the last minute. Make sure you have time to actually go through your essays, revise in a way that is descriptive but not overly descriptive. Try to get straight to the point. Don't fill it with fluff. Make sure that you have these stories that are genuine or at least come off as genuine as possible. And then preparing for the interview, don't ask questions from the FAQ. Instead, when you're done with your interview, get a card, get an email, write a thank you, keep it at that. Make sure mom and dad kind of keep their input to a minimum during this process. And then, make sure it's a friendly, upbeat mood throughout. Even if you do have trouble with a question, if something pops up where you don't know, look them straight in the eye and say, "Oh, that's a great question." Give a clear response. Give a sort of cogent response as you put it. So this is more of the I would say the interpersonal preparation where you're writing essays that are sort of personal. You want somebody else to see them. The are you being swatted right now? Then the same with the interview, very interpersonal as well. Um, but I think something that is a little bit less personal, there is sort of a numerical or a quantitative side to the entire process that's really difficult for a lot of people to ignore. And this kind of gets closer into well, first of all, your grades, what your grades actually look like. And then second of all, we talked about it a little bit earlier, the SSAT. So, what kind of role do you think grades, let's start off with grades, because the SSATs, I feel like it's a whole nother animal that we can maybe see in a minute. So, with the grades, as opposed to the essays, as opposed to the interview, if you have to make a pie chart and say, what percentage of this application is just having good grades, or what is the impact of the grades, compared to those other things?
I would say about 5%.
5%, yeah?
Or 45%, not 5%.
Okay, all right. So I was like, whoa. Okay.
Yeah. So here's my rationale for that random number that I just spat out. Smart for high tier schools is a given, right? Every other applicant is also extremely smart. They're also extremely talented, especially at Andover, right? Everyone there is smart. Everyone there is talented. Everyone there is kind. Sure. You're supposed to take your grades and build from there. Build your character from there. So when admissions counselors look at potential applicants and they look at, in this order, name, legacy, SSAT scores, grades, and then other components, right? Mm-hmm. So it's very important to have good grades because that's the first thing that the admissions counselors are going to look at. It's good to make a good impression. Think of it as this: grades in your SSAT are like this entry ticket, right? You pass that sort of test, then you move on. Then they look at other components of the application. So I would say that it's actually fairly important, but don't think that that's the only thing that's going to get you into high tier schools.
Okay, so sort of like you must be at least this tall to gain admission, but it's not necessarily the end all be all of admissions. I think grades. I think typically what you want to show, I think, is an upward trajectory.
Oh yeah,
showing some kind of improvement. A lot of people worry, in middle school. Oh, I played a lot of Fortnite. I played a lot of computer games, and I didn't necessarily have my grades together early on. But okay, so I actually sort of started to focus, started to improve my grades, and at least I show an upward trajectory. So, would you say that growth is maybe an important part of that process, even if you're slightly below the standard? I mean, where would you kind of rank that sort of improvement there?
I would say that I wouldn't say that playing Fortnite or any other video games and then having a really low grade point average and then moving up from there would be helpful because it's actually pretty easy to do that. But I think that admissions counselors, they definitely take into account the trajectory of where you're going academically because that shows that at least when you're at Andover, you're not stagnant, right? Andover is all about cultivating what you have and making it, like enhancing it, right? You're making yourself a better student. If you're getting the best scores ever, or at least you're just staying really consistent and you go to Andover, they might think that you're just going to be stagnant there, right? You might improve a little bit, but it's not, not exhibiting the growth that they would desire. So, I would say that, starting from a good base helps, and then actually going from there also helps.
Okay. No, that's fair. And then with the SSAT, we did a separate a Facebook Live event last week, and we were really talking about that involved the U.S. and the U.K. side, and the U.K. side has a completely different testing system, blah blah blah. But with the SSAT, I think we talked about how your SSAT score is only valid for a testing year, so you have to get it right within that testing year. That being said, there's not necessarily stopping you anything stopping you from preparing in advance. Um, Obviously, you got into the application process. You said October, but were you actually preparing before October for the SSAT? Were you aware of the SSAT and some of these things? And what would you kind of say were some of your key processes during that preparation period for it?
So I can't exactly recall when I started preparing for the SSAT. That was kind of, everything was
Yeah.
back then was kind of just like a fever dream. I
Yeah.
don't remember, like time was just an illusion and all that. But
Deep. Yeah.
I would say that it helps to prepare in advance. It helps to prepare a lot because there are very nuanced questions that the SSAT asks students that they might not necessarily be prepared for. Because I think a good way to put it is the SSAT is comprehensive, right? It's comprehensive for everything that you've learned so far, but they just ask it in a really weird way. So you'll know the concept. You just won't know like how they're going to spin it to actually ask you.
Hmm. Okay. I mean, out of those sections, I think from what we get over here on my end, a lot of my SSAT students over the years, one of the most challenging aspects I think is just straight up vocabulary. There's a huge section of the test, obviously, where you are answering synonyms, and all you have is just a word and then answer choices that are supposed to be the synonym of that word. But the problem is these are really intense. They have a high lexical level or lexile level of vocabulary, and so these are kind of going to be words where students may not necessarily have seen these before, and this is, largely considered one of the toughest parts of the test. So if you're a student who's trying to prepare for the synonym section of this test and prepare and build a vocabulary, obviously vocabulary does influence the reading side of the test as well. What would kind of be your advice to students who are looking to boost their vocabulary in a short period of time or in a long period of time, and any tips that from your perspective?
This sounds crass, but try reading. It helps a lot.
Try to read. Okay. Yeah.
going, going through the pages,
Real
it's
books.
really painful. Yeah. Oh, God forbid real books, but
Yeah.
it is painful for a little bit, but you kind of get into the groove. The reason I say this, it helps to memorize vocabulary. It helps to memorize the definitions. But
Hmm.
let's say the SSAT still asks about analogies and synonyms, right? And actually comparing two
Yeah.
vocabulary words. There are a singular word has multiple contexts that it could be used within. A vocabulary sheet gives you one or two, right? But if by reading a book you understand the different ways that words can be used, and this is the beauty of the English language, words can be construed in different ways. But I won't get into that, right?
Sure,
I
sure,
can't.
sure. No, but I think that's important, right? So what you're saying is build up a sort of a context around each of these words so that you have something that your memory, you can link back to. Oh, not only have I seen this word before, but I remember seeing it in this story. It was used in this situation. It had a positive tone or had a negative tone, and you can kind of build that world around a plot or around characters in a book or in a short story. Whereas if you're just looking at a straight list, there's really nothing but white space on the page, and it's a lot more difficult to kind of straight up memorize those words. I think it's tough to tell people that. You're right, because it is painful to say like, hey, listen, you should probably just read a few books. That's something that I think a lot of people should try to tackle during the summer. Obviously, when school kicks in, you're going to have English class, or you're going to have some sort of language class or whatever it might be, and you're reading things. But you're sort of overwhelmed with other subjects, math and science especially. And so it kind of gets tough to juggle. And a lot of people that I'll meet, a lot of students, a lot of moms will request, hey, can I have 500 words to study over the next couple of weeks? Can we? Oh, we already went through those. We went through 500 words this weekend. Can you give us more? How did you learn? How did you memorize 500 words in 2 days, 2.5 days? I just have trouble kind of urging people to take a little bit more of a slower memorization process. Where okay, if you are going through these lists, if you're not reading a book, you're going through lists. Try to use the word in a sentence. Try to create a story or create a paragraph where you're trying to use, more than one, 5 to 10 of these words in a paragraph, if possible. I met a guy who, went through stuff with him. He ended up going into Groton, also a Hong Konger. And what he would do is he would just message me different things on WhatsApp constantly using different vocabulary words. A lot of them jokes, a lot of banter and insults and this kind of playful stuff. And I wouldn't even always respond, but he knew that he could message me and use these words in his own way. So I really like, I firmly believe, I think in the same thing as you, building that context around vocabulary and things like that. I think it helps with the analogies, helps with the reading. With this, all that being said, though, what about the math side? So you did mention that you may have seen all these things before. What was that? You may have seen all these things before, but it'll be construed in a different way. It'll be presented in a different way. How would you compare the SSAT math to the math you were learning in school here in Hong Kong before you left? I mean, were there challenges that you didn't expect, or was it pretty
Oh
straightforward?
yeah. Numbers to me is a completely different language that I've never been able to comprehend really, even to this day.
Okay.
Um,
Fair. Yeah.
you know, like looking at the SSAT math, it was trying to understand it was like slamming my head against a desk. I coined the term face desking, but basically, it, it was a challenge at first, but it's more about exposure, right? Because
Okay.
the difference between my school, so I went to Chinese International School, CIS, and the math there compared to the SSAT math, the math in CIS was much more straightforward. It's like, oh, we're testing this concept, and you
Okay.
need to apply it here. The SSAT is like, we're testing this concept, you just don't know what it is, right? You don't know how we're going to ask it. It's going to be in some tricky way. You might need to combine several different concepts to actually like get to the answer.
Yeah.
Of course, there are some STEM geniuses out there who are far younger than me and would say, no, it's actually not. It's actually really easy. But
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So I would say that in terms of the math side, there was a lot more preparation that went into that
Okay.
compared to the CAT.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. And then I guess last but not least, just to wrap up the SSAT and the application process, there is actually an essay section. Some people do take, like you said, several drafts or several revisions to run through and actually complete their essays for the application. But when you're going through and taking the SSAT, you're going to have to end up writing something by hand in a time limit that really does illustrate, your writing potential without having someone be able to help you to revise or check grammar or something like this. While the essay is not, scored, this is something that schools will take into consideration. So, what were some of your strategies answering the essay questions? Did you go with the argumentative style where you have, which side would you choose, which side would you argue? Did you go more for the creative writing style, or what was your process here?
So not the essay itself. Used for like a fairly nefarious purpose for testers. It's to see whether what you write under pressure matches up with what you write in your essay.
Yeah.
So let's say you have someone write your application for you, right? Your essay. But no one's there to hold your hand and write the words for you during the SSAT.
Yeah.
So if you write some crap on the SSAT, but then you somehow, produce this pristine and polished PhD level dissertation-esque essay,
Yeah.
they're going to tell the difference, right? And that's probably going to impact you very heavily in the long term.
Sure.
But yeah, the way I'd approach the essay, read. It again, reading helps. Gain an understanding of how to have proper syntax, but also that there are two options on the essays, right? You can write a fictional story. That's what I
like
use.
a personal narrative. Yeah.
Or they'll give you a topic to talk about in a very critical or analytical way. And pick your poison, whichever one you want to do. I chose the fictional one because it was a lot easier for me to just kind of think on the spot and just write everything down, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's where reading helps. If you read enough, you will understand, oh, I want to tell this kind of story, and this is how I would tell it.
Mm-hmm.
The SSAT, I remember one of my stories was heavily influenced by this book called The 100-Year-Old Man Who Climbed Out of a Window and Disappeared.
Nice. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I took apart. Actually, no, I don't remember, but I took a lot of cues from that book.
Okay, I see what you mean. So, like, find a writing style. If you are going to go with creative writing, if that's going to be the poison you pick, maybe find a creative writing style that sort of you enjoy, and you can use that as sort of a template or a basis to work on, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's cool. That's a good idea. All right. Well, thank you so much for sharing all that. I think we do have one question that popped up in the chat about the SSAT vocabulary. We did go through that. I think what I'll say to kind of remind everyone of, if we just sum that up, one of the best ways that you can go through and learn SSAT vocabulary is reading. Take a long-term approach. Spend the summer before reading different things. Exposing yourself to a lot of different genres or different vocabulary words. And the reason for this is to build context. Context is going to be the story, the character that surrounds the word, and that'll help you kind of remember the meaning based on how it was used. And if you are just looking at a list, if you don't have that much time, you can't run through, or you're reading too many other things for school. If you're going to do a list, try to write your own sentences. Try to use them in conversation. Send them in messages to people on WhatsApp or whatever you're using. And try to build your own context around them when you are building that SSAT vocabulary. But okay, so let's say, so we've talked about the actual timeline, we've talked about the interview process, grades, essays, SSATs, and let's say now all of that has gone through and you've actually been successful, and now you're attending a boarding school in the U.S. So your basis will be on Andover and your experience there. But obviously, when you're in a U.S. boarding school, they'll have different, athletics leagues, and you'll be able to know different people from different schools and the different things that go on at U.S. boarding schools in general. So, yeah, would really love to kind of get your perspective on not only Andover, but then just sort of boarding school life in general, and how you and your friends or your roommates over there kind of live that life and make it through in one piece. So I guess starting with Andover, how would you kind of describe the students who they accept? I mean, you said, being smart is a given, the good grades, the good SAT scores, but is there a Philippian? Is there somebody who defines the Andover ethos or the typical personality or student characteristic?
There's a particular finds that the Andover spirit. His name is Salvador Gomez Clone. He is a wonderful person, but I don't know him that well. So I'll describe the general Andover model. Andover is a community of people of the most kind, genuine, down to earth, smart, and talented people that I've ever met. Right? It's a life changing community that has transformed me in a lot of ways. Not only making me a lot more open as a person, but also just being able to relax, but also mature at the same time. It's something that you definitely have to experience for yourself that I can't really put into words. It's like
Yeah, yeah.
when someone goes away or you haven't seen someone for a long time and you meet them again, right? And they've changed. You can't really pinpoint how, but you know that they've changed.
They're
That's
not the
essentially
same.
what
Yeah. Okay.
Andover.
They're
That's
back.
yeah,
Um,
yeah, exactly. That's what Andover has done to me. You
sure.
can't exactly pinpoint what it is, but it's something special.
I think one of the words that popped out from all of that that you just mentioned, it's tough. It might be tough to actually pinpoint it per se, but one thing that did jump out is you said humble. And a lot of people, I think, when they envision or they think about the number one boarding school or the top 10 boarding schools and these sorts of things, is not necessarily humility. You kind of get this misperception that people who are able to get into these schools might have a sense of overconfidence or entitlement or something like this. And yet, one of the few words that you used to try to describe the people at Andover was humble. So, what do you mean by that?
So I think one thing to remind a lot of the parents who are watching right now is that the kids at Andover were all human, right? A lot of us understand that we are at a prestigious boarding school, right? It gets to your head sometimes, but what I mean by humble is that we all acknowledge each other's strengths. We all acknowledge that we were coming from different backgrounds, and we don't let that change the way that we interact with other people. Just because you're a math prodigy or a math Olympiad doesn't mean that, you know, you're necessarily better than anyone characteristically. I would say that Andover just somehow fosters this natural behavior of being kind and open towards everyone else around you. Yeah, it's a very spiritual community.
Yeah, and I think is that part of moving into. I kind of want to get your thoughts on moving into a boarding school and what's that like. Is that sort of mutual esteem, that mutual self-respect and respect among each other? Does that come from actually living and studying together and sort of being away from home and maybe being a little bit more reliant on one another? Or
Yeah, absolutely. Because you don't have the parental figures hovering behind you all the time. You have
Mhm,
to learn how to form networks of connections that will eventually get you through hard times, right?
mhm.
Just because you're the smartest person in the room doesn't necessarily mean you can handle everything on your own. And I think that's what also grounds everyone is that
Do
you're
you have a lot of
very,
trouble with that? You have a lot of trouble?
oh yeah,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
cry with every
Nice.
kid.
Right, but right, build a support system.
Yeah, you need that support system to get you through the tough times that Andover will throw at you.
Hmm.
Because like life isn't easy, right? I hate that phrase, but it definitely applies here.
Sure.
Yeah, you that just needing other people essentially
Sure.
is
Yeah. I guess that kind of does get us into the idea of community and what it feels like. I mean, is there a big difference? You reference back to your time over at CIS. I mean, would you say that there are really major differences in, a boarding school which is full of international students versus a school here in Hong Kong that is an international school? I mean, did you kind of notice a striking difference in the sense of community between CIS, where you're not necessarily boarding, versus Andover, where everybody is living and kind of, eating and all that kind of stuff together?
yeah, you feel like you're a part of a family.
Hmm.
Um, because you really are, right? You don't have parents around and you need to have a group of people that you can rely on. At CIS it was more like a dog eat dog kind of world, right? You
Yeah.
have to do it yourself. It's very competitive. And Andover, the same competition is there. It's just you don't feel it at all because everyone else is so kind and so dependent on you, and you're dependent on everyone else, right? You feel as though you're part of a family within your own friend groups. So it's ironically, it's actually a lot more relaxing at Andover.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks for that. Yeah. It does make sense that you would kind of form those family bonds. So, with all that in mind, if you do have that support system, if you are kind of interacting with everybody on a regular basis, and that sense of humility and everything that you all share, what are some of the typical challenges as far as the day to day, even if it is just being away from home, or missing your favorite snacks and people from back home, but also to the grind and the gruel and the routine of everything. So does anything kind of stick out to you as far as like the day to day challenges of Andover, slash boarding school in general?
And Andover, you're given a lot of freedom over what you can do. I feel like back home here, especially, it's kind of like everything's scheduled, right? Everything, okay, after
Sure.
class, you're going to go
Yeah,
to ballet class or whatever, right? Here, it's like
I do a lot of
you
that.
can choose to go, right? You have these free periods and you need to know what you do with them. Don't overexert yourself because it's just going to be a horrible time. I did that last year and it was not fun. But also, you really need to understand that you need to make use of the time that you have in Andover. So that's pretty much one of the hardest things that I can stress that comes up in Andover a lot is that you need to manage your time, not only to get everything done, but also to fill up your schedule. Because if you don't really do much, you're just going to be sitting there with a lot of free time on your hands. Even like homework, which is a very time-consuming part of your day for most students. Kind of just like you'll get it done,
Yeah,
and you'll be sitting there doing nothing.
yeah, okay. Um, I think that's really interesting because filling free time doesn't sound like a problem. It doesn't sound like a challenge. It sounds like the opposite of a challenge. Most people would say like, "Oh, I can do whatever I want." So what do you do to ensure that you're actually getting those free times filled? I mean, are you getting like a whiteboard on the wall, or are you actually kind of filling in a daily calendar or diary? And how involved is the actual school in providing free time opportunities versus you have to go through and sort of seek out your own?
So I'm not the kind of person who has like a whiteboard on their wall and like writes everything down or has like bullet journals with these super fancy illustrations, right? I just don't do that. That's
Yeah,
not my
man.
thing.
You're not on Pinterest or anything?
I can't do that. I will tear the page apart.
Yeah.
But basically, I think Andover's a lot about cultivating your own passions. A
Hmm.
lot of the activities that you seek to do are very much related to what you want to pursue. Andover definitely advertises that. We have this thing called Club Rally, where you go in and you find clubs that you want to participate in, and that's also filling up your free time. A lot of other things are like taking initiative to start your own projects or kickstart your own things. I have a YouTube channel called DNR Productions. You can search it up right now. That's a personal
DNR
plug.
Productions, shout out.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's essentially like that's a good example of me taking some time out of my day to engage in something that I enjoy. It it doesn't have to be, oh, I need to do all these extracurricular activities to make myself look like a total god. But
Yeah.
it definitely does have to cater towards your passion. And
Right.
Andover is really good at catering towards the students' passion.
Sure. I like the idea of sort of building a trajectory or continuing a trajectory towards an actual passion, because the next step, I mean, even if you are a freshman or a sophomore, the next step is to kind of leverage those things that you've done over a long period of time into, I hate to say it, but then a university application. It never ends. And so I think, looking a little bit forward or predicting the future a little bit can help. I think it is so unfair because young people these days are kind of forced to consider what they want to be, who they want to be at a much earlier age than even for my generation. And it's tough to say, okay, I'm 14 and I know what I want to do. I'm 15, 16, 17, or even 50 years old and know what you want to be when you grow up. So it can be really challenging to kind of build that trajectory. But I do think you're right. Like, try to go for something that makes you happy, but also kind of does smoothly lead into a college application, because that'll be a really great way to to find those stories, those parts that can be developed into a story, like you said earlier with the essays, that are straightforward and real, and they did actually help you grow, because the university applications are going to be very similar to the gateway applications in a lot of ways. Okay, so make sure. So you're saying make sure that you actually do fill your time with things. One of the big challenges. But when you do have, I think the rest of your schedule is class. So I know that we catch up a little bit every week for English class, and with the text that you're reading and the level of the analysis with those texts is in depth. We're looking at a lot of really deep contextual literary analysis. But what about the classes in general? Not necessarily English or this or that. One question I would say is, how did you go about choosing your classes? The U.S., I think, has a lot of different options, especially at boarding schools. You're looking at 200, 300 different course options overall. So how did you go about choosing your courses? And then on top of that, how would you describe the general sort of atmosphere or composition of these classes?
So, for freshman and sophomore year, your classes are pretty much set for you. The only thing that really changes is your math and art, and that's where you choose. So for me, freshman year, I chose to take a video class, because that's pretty much like what I do now. Apart from writing and reading and all that, I also do make videos. Again, YouTube channel Zeno Productions, go check it out. Again, Andover is about fostering your passions, right? Cultivating it and allowing it to grow, and eventually leading to some great project. And the classes at Andover in general, like as you go into like junior and senior year, you're given a lot more freedom as to what you want to do. But so I can't speak for the seniors and uppers. That's what we call juniors right now, because I'm not one of them. But the classes at Andover are designed to challenge students in a way that doesn't necessarily impede their learning. You're not stuck in trying to grapple with this text, but actually accelerates it. Right? In English class, how fitting, you may be like presented with a book or a text, which may be hard to break down at first. But with every passing class, you find yourself becoming more and more comfortable with the initially like arduous text. By grappling with it, you're allowing your analytical ability to grow. Right? The results don't come instantly, right? But with most things, you have to stick with it.
So it's important to struggle then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. My Latin teacher puts it perfectly. Mr. Mann says, you can look it up online, right? You can go to Spark Notes. You can do whatever. But the best way is to grapple with it, to fight it, right? And by fighting it and by losing, you kind of learn how to tackle the next opponent, right? And eventually, after constant battles and losses or victories, you come out on top and you eventually dominate the field.
Nice. There you go. Okay. Thanks for that. I think that, that can certainly be applied to not only, like you said, an English class, but to any class. Make sure that you embrace the struggle and then grow from it, learn from it, and take on the next task, one by one. Okay. So as far as the actual, I would say the class composition, they're going to be tough. You have to grapple. But you do have a community support system. You've got, a lot of very humble, motivated individuals on campus, the family system that you said. But all that in mind, I think what some people do worry about is when is the right time to actually go to boarding school? And is boarding school, any better than some of the top schools, especially in Hong Kong, a lot of great IBDP schools, strong A-level schools, and these sorts of things. So when you kind of look back and say, okay, now that I'm here, is there anything in particular that boarding school students, especially those from Hong Kong, might actually miss about living and going to school in Hong Kong? Or I mean, is the trade-off worth it in that way? Or
I can't speak for people because I'm not most people. But I would say that the reason I chose to depart CIS to go to Andover was because I wanted more control over what I wanted to learn. I feel like at CIS, everything's pretty like rudimentary and structured, and
Hmm.
You have like 10 choices to choose from, right? You can go into these different subjects. But at Andover, like I took art history this year. It was one of the most challenging classes I've ever taken, but at the same time,
Very challenging class, yeah.
but at the same time, I had the choice to choose it, right? And it made me grow intellectually, like far more than I could have at CIS.
Hmm.
So it definitely just comes down
Yeah.
to personal, right? Do you want more freedom in what you want to learn, or do you want to stick in the IB curriculum?
Hmm.
Do
Okay.
you
Yeah.
want to uh, to chase your own passions and have more venues to do so, or do you want to stick down this academic route that will challenge you more intellectually,
Yeah.
right?
I think
Like,
that is a very big difference between the IB and the US system. On one hand, the IB is very, very structured, so you know exactly what you're going to be facing, exactly what the assessments are going to be. Same for the IGCSEs or the A levels. The American system, I think something that a lot of people struggle with in the American system is that it's completely undetermined in many ways, especially as you get, like you said, up to junior and senior year. You might have to tick a couple of boxes, but overall, you have courses like art history or like oceanography or these sorts of things. Whereas for for IB students, they're actually most people are just dropping art and taking a second science or something like this because why would you want to explore anything that's so unnecessary to your existence and your college application if you can just go ahead and you know do another science, do a higher level math or something. So yeah, really great points. I guess, after that, just to wrap things up a little bit, Ralph, is there a favorite part that you might have where, that makes it kind of all worth the challenge, the struggle, like you said, the day to day, or is there anything that, looking back on you're finishing up year two, is there anything that you kind of look back and say, wow, that was amazing? That makes the whole situation and all that SSAT, all the essays and all that kind of worth it?
so two things. The academics are rigorous, right? But I cannot stress enough how much more developed intellectually Andover has made me. I've become, in my opinion, I wouldn't say I'm like the perfect student. I don't consider myself a good student in general, but I would say that I've you know
Yeah, I don't think you are. Yeah.
yeah, no, I know. Um, I would say that I've matured a lot more in terms of tackling work and handling myself academically. But more importantly, I've met people who seem to genuinely care about me, who seem to look out for my well-being. I've met some of my best friends here. I've met some of them. I've had some very good relationships here. I still do have those same relationships. I'm not implying that I've just completely broken them off.
Hmm.
But I would say that the people make it worth it.
Yeah.
You're surrounded by this milieu that encourages intellectual development and just cognitive exercise,
Hmm.
and it's a place that I can't really find anywhere else. I know that Andover's videos say like, oh, it's this wonderful place that you just can't find anywhere else. Like, and I appear to be speaking that verbatim, but it's true, right? I can't
Hmm.
disagree with that.
Nice. All right, sir. Well, thank you so much for all of that. I really do appreciate getting your perspective. Sometimes I think what happens in the education industry is exactly what you said. Things become verbatim. You end up hearing the same sort of cliches, the same sort of advice, year in, year out, every single application cycle. You kind of hear the same thing. So I think, hearing things from you is invaluable insight to a lot of young people who are kind of, terrified of this process. So thanks for, clearing a lot of this up. Thanks
Yeah.
for adding your 2 cents. Um, uh, you know, Hopefully we can kind of do a little, we're hoping to do a little bit more of things like this in the future and get student insights. So, thank you for being the first person to come on and do a Facebook Live with us and all that kind of stuff.
So
What is it? Ralph.y.lam on IG. Yeah.
Oh yeah, and look at Ralph125 on Instagram. No spaces, no capitals.
There you go. Nice, nice. All right, sir. Well, I'll just thank you once again, and thank you. Oh, okay. Yeah, thank you so much for we did get a question or two in the chat, and thank you for everybody who joined. I don't know if you saw, but your roommate popped in there at one point, and you
Oh,
had a couple people say what's up. So thanks for everybody who came and watched. We're gonna go ahead and post this on the Cosmo Education YouTube channel as well. So if you guys did not get enough Ralph, you'll have a chance on YouTube as well. And then this will be on our Facebook profile. And then we are at causeway.education on IG. So many different ways to catch up with Ralph. If you guys did not, if you're watching this video later and you do have a question or a follow-up question, please feel free to message us on IG or on Facebook or YouTube in the comments section, and we will be able to get back to you guys. So please feel free to add anything else. Thanks for saying that, guys. So just take a look at the chat. Thank you for all the comments. For now, though, Ralph, thank you again, sir. I really appreciate all the time. What are you up to the rest of the day?
nothing much.
Just
usual.
keep it easy, relax. All right, so leave it at that then, and catch up with you again soon, yeah?
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Rob. Bye.
Bye.